Yeah. So I think it's important. I think it's important for kids and adults to take some time to just be bored and see where your thoughts go. And that's one of the reasons why I think we're doing this podcast is just to bore other people with our thoughts.
Mission accomplished.
We did it. Mike's talking about work comp again.
Welcome to episode 3 of Legalese. And my name is Matt Patton. I am the non professional. And I am here with the professional, Mike Patton, my brother. Mike, how you doing today?
Doing good. I like being called a professional as opposed to expert because we're very ethical, and that's a random
We love
ethical.
ethical codes.
Yeah, and it reminds me of Leon the Professional, that movie from 1994 with Natalie Portman and
I mean, you're talking to a millennial here. I was alive at that time. I have no idea what you're talking about.
oh, great action movie from 1994.
Leon the
Not that I
professional.
not that I was watching it.
Something we'll have
I
to
was
look up.
I was 9 at the time.
Something we'll all have to look up together.
Yep.
So today we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about workers' compensation, and um, and you've spent a lot of time doing work comp cases.
I
Um,
have. Yeah, the
Maybe
better
tell us a
part of
little bit about your
yeah,
background there.
yeah. I right out the gate from in 2011, I started litigating workers' compensation cases, and was very grateful that Joe, my dad, handed me a full caseload of workers' compensation cases to litigate. And at the time, the law had just changed. They'd made a massive reform of the law in 2011. And so I was jumping into it at a perfect time to do it because nobody knew how to litigate cases under the new law. And so I did, in my opinion, quite well. And I don't even know how many cases we litigated, but it was a lot, and I learned a ton, and I loved it because I felt like that was a very practical way to help people who were in a crisis situation within the work comp setting, which is a difficult. Um, it's a difficult system to navigate, and we did it quite well. So
So people probably are at least have some familiarity with like a car accident claim. So you're injured in a car accident, somebody else's fault, and then you have a claim with their auto insurance company and receive compensation. So what's maybe some key differences between a car accident claim and a workers' compensation injury claim?
great question. So a work comp claim is the benefit that you get if you're injured at work. And something that people don't know is fault has nothing to do with it. And it's a from a public policy perspective, the purpose of a work comp law is to broaden the base of people who get benefits and lower the liability for the business for each individual uh, claim. So before an employee could sue an employer before the Work Comp Act, which happened in kind of progressive era 1920s. Kansas was one of the first states to ever have a workers' compensation law. But at any rate, the the employee before could sue an employer directly for negligence, but if they were at fault, uh, then they couldn't sue the employer at all, and they couldn't get any benefits. They're knocked out of the workforce, and just they were out of luck. And so this is a system designed to help injured workers, uh, first and foremost, get treatment and then get compensation for income loss. And there's been various versions of the law over the last 100 years. And uh, sometimes, in my opinion, they get the balance right. Sometimes they get it wrong. And you had this case in the 90s that was called Bergstrom. And under Bergstrom, just anybody, this is an exaggeration, but almost anybody could get a work disability claim. And so became very expensive for employers to do business. And it moved the pendulum in favor of the worker, maybe a little too much. And so they made an adjustment under the 2011 laws that, in a lot of people's opinion, mine included, that it lowered the benefits for employees too much, or injured workers. And they made some other changes with respect to the AMA guides, and how those interacted in 2015. Then the Supreme Court made a change that kind of moved it back towards some employee or injured worker focus. So that you have this pendulum swinging in terms of policy, and they just in 2024 made another change that was, in my view, a good compromise. It raised the caps on damages, but then kind of narrowed some of the benefits from uh, a long-term perspective. So it was a compromise, and a good one, I
One
think.
thing I'm curious about is there ever a setting or instance where negligence might come into play? Let me lay out an example. There's a worker who's involved in, is a hypothetical worker who's involved in a construction site. Something goes wrong, um, and there was some obvious bits of negligence on part of the employer. Didn't follow safety guidelines in some really key areas, and the worker dies. Does the surviving spouse have any sort of like wrongful death rights to wrongful death suit in that instance, or is it all done under work comp?
If it is only the employer that has, under common law, fault, then no, that's preempted by the workers' compensation statute, and the benefits are limited to that. They just raised the cap on the damages for uh, uh, death. The death benefit is now, the base benefit generally would be 500,000. Um, and so that can be, obviously, a devastating situation, particularly when it's not their fault. One of the things we would look at in a situation like that is, well, if is there a third party contribution to this? Because that is would just be subject to regular court damages. Uh, Good
So,
question.
if, for example, if you're driving for your employer and somebody who's not your employer causes an accident involving you, even though you're in the course of your employment, because the person who caused the accident was not your employer, regular kinds of injury law would kind of take play there.
Exactly. So you would have two claims in that setting. You would have your workers' compensation claim. They would be the primary payer. They would cover your medical bills. You'd get all of the regular benefits through work comp. And then you'd have a claim against, we call them a third party tortfeasor in
Mm-hmm.
that scenario. And we do a lot of that. And that is usually one of the better case scenarios, because you get good treatment, and you have liability that you can recover from uh, through liability insurance. So,
Mike, what is a lien?
yeah. So, under the Kansas Workers' Compensation Statute, uh, it establishes a lien uh, for the workers' compensation carrier or the employer against third party claims. So, uh, in the scenario that we just talked about, where there's a third party that's liable, then uh, the workers' compensation carrier gets paid back what they've paid out. So if you have a recovery of $100,000, and the work comp carrier has paid 25, then they just get that back, less the attorney's fees, um, in pursuit of that. Now, one thing we run into all the time is the third party recovery has an insurance policy cap, or the recovery is not as good as we want it to be, or there's some uh, comparative fault with uh, our client. So all of those things are become negotiable. There's also um, state law, state court made law that talks about loss of consortium, which is not a benefit under the Workers' Compensation Act, so they can't get a lien for a recovery for that. So there's lots of little ways to negotiate down the workers' compensation lien that we pursue, um, which is a huge part of those claims is negotiating liens, and and we often have success at that. So
Cool. Well, I think we have successfully probably articulated what a work conflict case is.
I could talk for a long time about it.
I know. I'm like, we kind of barely scratched the surface,
Yeah,
honestly.
yeah,
So maybe we'll explore this a little bit more in the next episode.
sure. We could
Um,
talk about next time. I know our our viewer would really want to hear about uh, how you calculate your damages in a workers' compensation claim.
and we should probably cover notice. Notice is a big deal.
Notice is a huge deal. The
Um,
short answer on that is tell your employer right away and follow it up in writing.
yes,
If you're
yes.
hurt at work,
Everyone needs to know that.
that would make my life a lot easier if you did that.
Any worker needs to know that. Notice is
Yeah,
huge. Quick
yeah.
notice, early notice. Um, okay. Well, let's move on to the non-professional portion of our conversation. What's been catching your interest, Mike?
Uh, I've I've been thinking a lot about our yearly hike. Matt and I, for the last 3 years, have hiked a 14er or a mountain that's over 14,000 feet. And we did Pikes, we did Gray and Torrey's Peak. That was crazy because we did two summits in one day, and
Do not recommend.
do not recommend that. And then last year we did Quandary. So what I'm thinking about is we got to pick another mountain, and I was thinking about just generally what a fun thing that is, and it's good for me personally, and hopefully for you too.
Mike, why did you get interested in mountain climbing?
I don't know. So my wife and I went on a trip to Pikes Peak 4 years ago, and we took the cog rail up to the top of Pikes Peak, and they were talking about people hiking it, and I was like, I could do this. That was it. Then you and I planned a trip, and we did, and it
Yeah.
it was I think it was harder than I thought it would be for sure, but it definitely was a lot of fun. I just loved when we got back down and we walked into Manitou Springs, and we were just so tired, and then we got some Mexican food. That was just the best.
I mean, I don't know about our choice to get Mexican food. I was like more exhausted than I had been in years, and I'm eating this really spicy salsa. That's not an ideal combination, but you know, it was
That
the
is
food that was available. Um, and just for anybody who is familiar with pikes, we did not climb Bars Trail, which is the
more difficult trail. Yeah,
24 miles, something like
something
that,
like that. Yeah,
something crazy. We
there
went
and back. Yeah,
we went up the back side of the mountain, which was a little shorter.
yeah.
Um, but there was a moment. I mean, for me, one of the biggest memories was uh, when you get close to the summit. For me, the altitude really started to hit, and you're where we were coming up. You're kind of bouldering, um, and man, getting dizzy climbing up boulders, that is an unsettling feeling. But we made it. We
Yeah,
made it.
yeah. It started to feel precarious. We were like getting dizzy. You feel the altitude, and you get so exhausted so fast. Like I think we were going maybe 20 feet at a time, and then we take a rest at the end.
Hmm.
And uh, but
Yeah.
lots of fun. And I think that's what is so great about it is you're doing this thing that is so much more difficult than physically than you ever do because so much of our day-to-day lives are very comfortable. I work hard, but my hard work is mostly sitting here at this desk and uh, or occasionally in a courtroom, and frankly, it's really tiring to be in a courtroom for long periods of time for me. And I think that's what's so great about doing something like setting aside a time to go do something that's physically very difficult, because I think for me, it provides a good reset, and just getting into nature and having a good time, but doing something that's hard uh, physically is excellent, because you and I were talking earlier in this week. It's like we've got these things that are in our pocket all the time that can always just provide an easy dopamine release. And that's really bad for us. And I think there's something to resetting, connecting with nature, having a very long period of time where you're disconnected from devices and doing something physically hard that's just good for uh, your body, mind, and soul, I think.
Yeah. I was yesterday got home from work and I don't I have a pretty narrow window between when I get home from work and my kids go to bed. And so my kids were asking me if they could watch screens when I got home from work. And I was the uncool dad and was like, I'd like to, well, maybe this isn't uncool dad, but I was the uh, bubble burster and said, I think let's not do screens. I'd love to just play with you guys. Can we find something to do? And Daphne lost her mind. So we ended up sitting with crying Daphne for about 30 minutes.
Yeah.
um, and, it's like my wife didn't think it was any kind of overreaction to like dopamine stimulus. Uh, that was kind of where my head went, maybe because of our
You,
previous conversations.
you're thinking, oh my gosh,
I
she's addicted to the dopamine response. Yeah. And
mean,
it's certainly something to be aware of as a parent, but also, you know,
kids throw
something,
temper tantrums.
yep. And
Yeah,
it's something to give yourself grace about as a
yeah,
parent. Like,
yeah,
yeah, it's like
yeah. But
limit screen time, but also,
so we got to the end of the crying, and we did get to read 15 minutes of Prince Caspian. So
oh, that's pretty sweet.
yeah, so
Yeah.
we had a story had a happy ending there.
Yeah. I, I think, yeah, just because we've got these things in our pocket, and we've got, you know, bigger screens we watch at home, and all that all that stuff. I think it's good to take time aside to be bored. We don't ever have to be bored. We're sitting in a line and we can pull out our phones and look at Facebook. And it's something that we've lost. How do I just be alone with my own thoughts for any amount of time? And that's something, being on a mountain, uh, you get to do. And the for when we did quandaries, Matt climbed one mountain and I climbed another. It wasn't planned, but that's the way it worked out, which is maybe a story for another day. We were just mad at each other. No, I got up early and Matt had altitude sickness initially, and so I went ahead and went, and then he felt better, and then he climbed a different mountain. But just being alone with my thoughts for 7 hours on a mountain was fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and yeah, so I think it's important. I think it's important for kids and adults to take some time to just be bored and see where your thoughts go. And that's one of the reasons why I think we're doing this podcast, is just to bore other people with our thoughts.
Mission accomplished.
We did it. Mike's talking about work comp again.
Oh, that's great. Well, I think that's a wonderful note to end on. Let's
Sounds
end
good.
the boredom.
Yeah.
Um,
But
yeah. What I did want to recommend, there's a video on YouTube by a channel called Veritasium about boredom. It's on this very topic. It's really great. So I would recommend uh, go and listen to that sometime soon.
Veritasium. Okay. Send me.
Veritasium is the name of the channel, and they have
Yeah,
a video on boredom. So yeah, I think
I'll check that
it
out.
was a great video. So
Another a book on this topic is called Comfort Crisis, and that recommend reading that book as well. Well,
cool.
all right. Thanks for listening, guys.
Yeah, thanks
Appreciate
for
you.
listening, and we will see you next time. And have a great week.